Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Ashley and this is Heebee Jeebeez TV. Now, here we like to talk about stuff like true crime, paranormal, unsolved mysteries, cryptids, basically anything that would give you the heebie-jeebies. Today, I am back with another paranormal story, but before we get into that case, I just want to send you guys the quick reminder that I always do to please comment, like, subscribe. If you guys enjoy this type of content, it really does help me grow here on YouTube. And if you guys are interested in more of my content, more stories about true crime, paranormal stuff, go over to my TikTok. It's the same username at Heebee Jeebeez TV. And I post there about 2, sometimes even 3 times a day, just short stories, shorter formats. So if that's your preference, just head over there and check it out. I also just want to say a quick thank you to everyone that has found me on YouTube from TikTok and vice versa as well. I see a lot of new people subscribing here and over there on my TikTok. So thank you to everyone who has decided to subscribe. It really does mean a lot to me. It helps me grow a little bit more every day. And, ultimately, I'm just a little bit closer to getting where I want to be. Okay, so enough rambling. Let's get into today's story. So, considering I am a big fan of the paranormal, well, I shouldn't say fan, it's more of like an enthusiast. I'm super interested in it. I've experienced quite a lot of it my entire life. So naturally, I have quite a lot of interest in the topic. So when I was looking for a new case to research, something that not everyone has done to death, there's so many stories that basically every paranormal channel covers. And I kind of want to start looking for stuff that's a little bit more different, stuff that doesn't get as much coverage. And I was surprised when I came across this story because it is apparently one of the more terrifying experiences in the paranormal realm. It's a very big story. I've seen a couple people cover it, but it has not gotten a lot of attention. And I'm not sure if it's because it was in the 80s, so it was quite a long time ago. And maybe stuff from the Warrens has kind of overshadowed it. But regardless, this story I was really shocked to discover because it is pretty terrifying. And so that being said, we're going to talk about the San Pedro haunting that happened in California. So the story revolves around a young woman named Jackie Hernandez, who was just 23 years old at the time in 1998 when all of this started happening. And during this time, she had just discovered that she was pregnant with her second child, and she was also married. So, during these times, you would expect to be super happy. It's supposed to be one of the most memorable, positive, and just, one of the happiest times of your life. But unfortunately for Jackie, it was quite the opposite. Unfortunately, she was trapped in a marriage that was exactly the opposite of what she wanted. Her marriage was said to have been extremely depressive, controlling, even abusive. Her husband, Al Hernandez, was not the best husband to her either. And so naturally, all of this arguing, all of this turmoil led both of them to divorce. And during this time, they were living in a different part of Los Angeles, in a different suburb. And while all of this was going on, she took the opportunity to move somewhere brand new, to a place where she could, restart her life and start fresh. And that's when she made the decision to move with her first child, and while she was pregnant with her second child, to the coastal region of San Pedro. So a little bit of background on San Pedro. It was once its own city, but now it's been absorbed into LA. It's basically part of the greater Los Angeles area. And it's actually just left of Long Beach, and it's also home to the port of Los Angeles. And back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was home to many working class citizens and those who just simply couldn't afford the skyrocketing prices of Los Angeles real estate. So with that, Jackie moves to San Pedro and she moves into her newly rented bungalow located on 593 West and 11th Street on November 1988. Here, of course, like anyone would looking for a brand new start, she was looking forward to a much brighter future, a new life with her children, but unfortunately, that optimism was very short-lived. Not only was Jackie living on her own, she also had 2 children to care for at this time, And she was working multiple different jobs, just doing whatever she could to make ends meet. And she was also a student. So imagine trying to juggle all of these things while being a single mother. You could say that stress was probably a huge understatement. All of this turmoil and stress and just negative energy ended up manifesting something very, very terrifying for Jackie. And just a month after moving into her brand new home, weird stuff started happening across the house. And the next 3 years of Jackie's life would probably be best described as absolute hell. So, if you've ever experienced a haunting, I know I definitely have, so I can very much relate to this initial part. Most hauntings usually start out with very small things that you would kind of brush off or find a logical explanation for. So, an example would be stuff like odd noises in the house, maybe the floors creaking, maybe footsteps that could be a variety of different things. You could see shadows in the house. All of these things could be explained by a variety of different things. It could be the wind, it could be rodents in the house, it could be the house settling in, it could be many different things. So for Jackie, specifically, some of the first noises that she started hearing were coming from the wall. And she said that they sounded like pebbles were being dropped from inside the wall, falling to the ground. So initially, she thought that this could have possibly been mice or rats that were making their way inside the walls and then, just making a mess and things were falling onto the ground. She would then also hear floorboards that were creaking or just making odd sounds when no one else was home. But again, this could be easily be explained as the house settling or even just temperature changes in the home, especially when the house is significantly older. They're a little bit more vulnerable to these changes in the environment. Jackie was also the type of person that was not really afraid of these sort of things. She kind of was a skeptic, and there was a documentary where she talked about her experience. She initially said that she did not believe the house was haunted at all. Even at the beginning, she just was very much a skeptic and was not afraid. So moving on, Jackie had a very close friend of hers named Susan that would come over quite frequently. And on one of these visits, something happened that changed the outlook of both of these women when it came to the house. So both ladies were at Jackie's house. They were hanging out, having girl time, and, doing things that you would normally do with your girlfriend. And so they're catching up, chit-chatting while Jackie's kids were asleep, and the house was quiet for the most part. That is until Jackie started telling Susan about the odd things she was experiencing in the house. She kind of just wanted to gain a second perspective on the situation to see if she was kind of blowing things out of proportion. She then also goes on to tell Susan that she felt like something or someone was constantly watching her. Although she couldn't quite figure it out, she just felt like there was another entity, there was something else in the room with her at all times. And in the middle of this conversation, they hear something fall in the kitchen. So of course this startles both of them, but they figure there must be some sort of logical explanation for this. So they get up and they walk into the kitchen and they discover something odd. So they look inside and right away they see a picture frame that's on the floor that was once hanging on the wall. So they both kind of, try to reason with themselves, okay, it's not completely out of the norm for a picture to fall off the wall. It can happen. But what they saw next is what sent chills up and down their spine. So they look right next to the frame, and that's where they see the two screws or nails that were used to hang the photo up. They were placed right next to the frame, standing on their backs as if someone had placed them there intentionally. So as you can imagine, this freaked out both of the women, and Susan decided to cut her visit short and then head home while Jackie threw away the frame and the screws. The very next day, the activity increased. Now, I also just want to clarify that I've done quite a lot of research on this case, and this next part I found on one particular site detailing the story. And while I was looking at other pieces of information, this part is not in a few of the other sources floating around online. Now, I'm not sure if it's because the story is quite old or not, or if people just have different variations. And we'll get into this after the video as well, after the end of the story. there are a few skeptics out there that don't necessarily believe this entire thing actually happened. So keep that in mind. So, like I said, the next day the activity increased, and Jackie said she needed a babysitter. So she talks to Susan about this, and Susan recommends a teenage girl named Tina. Tina arrives to the home, and everything is totally fine. Everything is normal. And she puts the kids down for a nap and then settles herself into the living room and watches TV. In the middle of watching TV, she was overcome by this sense, or like this bad feeling, that she needed to go check on the children. So she gets up and starts walking towards the children's bedroom. That's when she sees that the bedroom door is slowly opening on its own. And surprisingly, she talks herself down. She talks herself out of this, saying that it's probably just the uneven floorboards or possibly even a draft in the house that was causing the door to slowly open on itself. So she brushes this off and heads into the bedroom. She sees that the kids are fine, so she starts walking back out. She closes the door behind her, but when she did that, the door slowly started opening again. Somehow, Tina rationalizes this in her mind again and says that it's probably just the floor not being fully leveled, and she ignores it and goes back into the living room. She goes back and watches TV and just waits out the rest of the evening, waiting for Jackie to get home. And when Jackie returns, she quickly tells her what happened. And she was kind of expecting Jackie to tell her, oh yeah, there's been a problem with the house. The floors are a little bit wonky or whatever, something to explain the activity that she had just experienced. But to her surprise, Jackie supposedly tells her that there's been a lot of creepy and odd stuff going on in the house that she couldn't quite explain. So that, of course, scares Tina off. It weirds her out quite a bit, so she leaves and goes home. The next day, Jackie needed a babysitter again, so she calls Tina, hoping that she'll agree to come over, and surprisingly, Tina says, sure, no problem. So both women were in the kitchen, and Jackie was explaining a few things to Tina about what to give the kids for food that day. But while she was doing this, she noticed that Jackie wasn't fully paying attention to her. She noticed that she was staring at something behind her. So she asks Jackie what's wrong, and then Jackie just kind of points to the corner of the room behind Jackie and asks her if she's recently gotten a new light. Jackie was very confused about this because she definitely had not gotten a new light. She hadn't installed anything new. So she turns around, and to her surprise, both her and Tina see what seemed like a glowing orb or light bulb in the corner of the room. The light was also said to have been hovering very slowly. So Jackie runs to her bedroom, grabs her camera because she wanted to get proof and document what was happening in her house. So she runs to the bedroom, grabs her camera, and snaps a photo of it. And I'll do my best to see if I can find this photo. No promises though. After that particular incident, Jackie, Tina, and Susan were fully convinced that there was something going on in the house. There was definitely some sort of ominous entity. Jackie confided in both of these women because she knew that they would at least understand, since they had also witnessed a lot of the strange activity going on in the house. But other than that, Jackie had no idea what else she could do to make this go away. She couldn't call the police because she just knew that they would brush her off as crazy. So she did the next best thing she could think of, and that was call her ex-husband, Al. Initially, he thought that she was kind of just exaggerating, trying to get some attention, possibly making up some stuff so they could possibly get back together, since apparently when they broke up, they were on somewhat good terms. And ultimately, he figured that she was probably just lonely in the house dealing with 2 kids on her own. So he heads over to her house and hears out what she has to say. Coincidentally, at the same time, Al's house had actually just recently burned down. So he was in need of a temporary housing situation. So he figured staying with Jackie for a good weeks to help her feel better, while also he found a new place to live, was a good idea for both of them. So he gets to her house and he listens to her story and he's playing along with it. And eventually he gets to the point where he tells her that he's going to call out this supposed spirit that's living in the house. Of course, in his mind, he didn't think that anything would actually happen and it was totally harmless. So he's there, he's calling out the ghost, he's basically provoking it. And if you know anything about the spiritual world, anything about paranormal, you know that provoking a spirit is basically the last thing you should do. So Al's calling out the ghost and nothing happened while he was there. So he was satisfied and he tells Jackie that she's probably just imagining things or exaggerating a little bit. And he tells her to stop worrying so much and he ends up leaving the house. Jackie tries her very best to take his word for it, but was also somewhat relieved that nothing happened while he was there. But then she walks into her bedroom for an unexpected surprise. She walks into her bedroom and she had some laundry that she was doing earlier in the day, so she had a few things to put away. She goes into her bedroom, opens her closet, and to her surprise, her entire closet, like all the walls inside her closet, were covered in the letters A-L, Al, the name of her husband. And the letter A was written in red and the letter L was written in blue. So at this point, she was absolutely convinced that there was spirit that was there to torment her. Now, during the time Al was living with Jackie, the energy, the encounters, the experiences were all said to have picked up quite a bit. One of the more scarier incidents, according to Jackie, was when she was watching TV with Al in the living room and they were just, hanging out, talking, watching TV, when out of nowhere, a pencil holder on a nearby table literally got flung towards Jackie, just barely missing her. And Al was also there and he witnessed the entire thing happen. Jackie was also having a very hard time sleeping during this period, and she would often get up in the middle of the night due to her insomnia. So she would walk around the house, she would go to the bathroom, she would go to the kitchen just to, pass the time. And on one of these nights, she was making her way through the house, and every single blind in the home decided to roll up on their own, completely frightening her. And if that wasn't enough, there was also a very terrifying incident that happened in the middle of the night when she went to go check on her children. And when she walks into the room, there was a shadowy figure of a man sitting on the bunk bed of her children. And here is a short clip of an interview Jackie did describing that incident.
He was full figured. He was sitting cross-legged on the bunk beds the first time that I saw him. And it was at the time at midnight when I was using the bathroom and you had to go through the bedroom in order to get to the bathroom. And there was always a light on in the back. It was a yellow light. It was on in the closet, so there was light in the room. It wasn't as if I was going through a dark room. And I saw him sitting on the bed and I turned real quick. And even though I didn't see him when I turned, I knew what I had seen. He was very grayish in appearance, and he looked as if he was very angry and evil at the same time.
But if that wasn't enough, there was another incident. Jackie had a friend who had actually just found a bunch of money in her attic one time. And this intrigued Jackie because, she was working multiple jobs. She was in need of money and her home actually did have an attic. So she figured she had nothing to lose and, why not? Why not go up there and see if she could find anything? So she goes towards her attic door, which is actually located in her laundry room right next to her kitchen. So she jumps onto the washing machine and she looks up to the ceiling and she starts pushing up on the trap door to get it open. Almost immediately, when she did get it open, she just felt like there was a very eerie feeling in the room, like she had just done something she wasn't supposed to do. So she ignores the feeling, goes against her intuition, and goes up into the attic. And initially, she didn't see anything, but she knew that something was there. She could feel it from every inch of her body that something was watching her. So she tries to ignore this and starts searching in the attic, but then she sees it. She sees something in the corner of the room. And right there in the corner of the attic, in the darkness, was the floating head of a man staring right back at her. And what she described it as was an older man that had more of a rounder, plumper face, but she didn't stay there too long to get many more details. All she wanted to do was get out of there. After these incidents, as you can imagine, Jackie was absolutely terrified and basically didn't know what else to do. She kept confiding in Susan, and they would go on frequent walks together where Jackie would basically use that time to vent to her. And on one of these walks, they actually ran into Jackie's landlord and told him what was happening about the home and also trying to get some history on the house if there was anything that had happened there. He had absolutely no idea what to make of the entire situation, but he felt really bad about what she was going through, so he told her that he would call a local priest that he knew in order to come bless the home, and hopefully that would make a lot of the experiences tone down. The next day, two priests did arrive to Jackie's home and they did bless the house, but that's not all they did. They actually ended up making the situation a lot worse for Jackie. During their visit, they ended up accusing her of bringing death into her home because they had spotted a skull figurine that Jackie had placed inside her fish tank as a decorative piece. But they took that as her, practicing black magic or being a Wiccan and believing in Satan. And on top of this, they also accused Jackie of putting her son at risk of being possessed. After they left Jackie's home, she received a call from CPS claiming that the priest had reported her because they did not think that she was a mentally fit mother to raise her children and that she had supposedly been on hallucinogenics during her pregnancy. So at this point, obviously, Jackie realized that she just could not confide in anyone else. She could only really rely on talking to Susan about this. And now not only did she have to deal with all of these creepy things happening in her house, she also had to deal with CPS on a regular basis because after that report came in, they had to do regular checkups on her. Now, if this was happening to many of you, I know a lot of people will probably just wonder, well, why don't you just move, right? It's a simple solution. Well, moving is not an easy thing for a lot of people. There's actually quite a lot of expenses involved in this. And Jackie was having a hard time, just keeping afloat. She was having a hard time paying all of her bills, feeding her children, feeding herself. It was a difficult time for her. So moving was simply just out of the question for Jackie at this time. So Susan is watching Jackie go through all of this and she feels bad. She feels guilty that one of her closest friends is having a really hard time and there's not much she could really do about it. But that's when Susan gets an idea. She tells Jackie she should call a paranormal investigator because at the very least they wouldn't judge her about it. So Jackie gives it some thought. She thinks about it a little bit and she gives in because after all, at this point, she had absolutely nothing to lose. On August 8th, 1989, Jackie calls a man named Dr. Barry Taffy, and he was a paranormal investigator, and they agreed to come over. But at the same time, during that phone call, they assure her that it's probably nothing, that there's probably some sort of logical explanation for this that could be debunked, because that is the case for most paranormal hauntings. People usually don't fully look into the situation, and for the most part, a lot of these things could be explained. So a few days later, the team arrives for their first session. So as they prepare, Jackie had called her ex-husband Al to come over to watch the kids while she dealt with the paranormal investigators. So she asks Al to take her kids upstairs to their bedroom while she gives the investigators the entire story. And this team of investigators was made up of Dr. Barry Taffy, of course, but he also had a few teammates, which included Gary Boehm and Jeff Wheatcraft. As their investigation begins, almost immediately, all the power in the house completely cuts off. And on top of this, she also tells them that whatever is haunting the house very likely lives up in the attic. Barry's team also then notices that there was a very foul smell in the house. They couldn't quite pinpoint it. It was a mixture of different things like rotting garbage, something that was decomposing, wet dog. It was just a very foul smell. And after that, they also started hearing a very loud thumping in the attic that sounded like a 200-pound rat. And if that wasn't enough, the team also noticed a very strange substance that was oozing from the walls. And of course, there was the whispers coming from the attic. A sample of the ooze that was coming from the wall, and I'll put a picture here, was taken by the team and sent for analysis. And later on, when the results were received, they were quite shocking, although a lot of people claim that these results are not to be trusted. So it was determined that the sample that was returned was of human blood plasma with a high copper and iodine content, and that it was also of male blood. But like I said, this result went on to be highly scrutinized because the lab analyst apparently refused to be identified. So there was a lot of questions surrounding the accuracy of the sample. So with that, the team wastes no time and they head straight for the attic and they make their way up there with their camera gear. Meanwhile, Jackie's husband is in the bedroom with the kids and they're kind of just laying down, talking, relaxing, when all of a sudden, he hears a very dark voice whisper something to him that says, "Get them the hell out of here." Of course, he was completely freaked out about this, and before he could get up and do something, he hears a piercing scream coming from the attic where everyone was working, and it was Jeff. He runs out of the bedroom just in time to see Jeff fall from the attic into the hallway, and he's absolutely petrified, telling everyone that something unseen had quite literally grabbed his camera from him and started choking him. He then went on to describe the incident as if a rope had been tied to his camera and then fully yanked away from him. Somehow, and I don't know how they did this because I know I would not be brave enough to go back in there, Jeff and his team members gathered the courage to go back into the attic to retrieve his camera. And it actually took them about 45 minutes to find everything. And when they finally did, the camera had been disassembled. So the body of the camera was found on one side of the attic, and then the lens was found on the complete other side of the attic. And with that, the entire team was completely convinced that Jackie was telling them the truth the entire time, and they would leave the house that evening, telling Jackie that they would return at a later date to continue the investigation. Once they left the house, Jackie felt like she was getting this really bad feeling. She just felt like something was going to happen. It was almost as if the team had disrupted or provoked the spirit that was there. But at this point, there was really nothing Jackie could do about it. So she just did her best to move on with her day at that point. By that evening, Jackie went to go put her children to bed, and she went to the living room to go watch TV. And eventually she would doze off on the couch. A few hours later, she would then wake up, and she said that she was completely ice cold. The entire house felt like it was freezing, and she also had this impending feeling of doom. So she goes to the kids' bedroom to check on them, and that's where she sees something terrifying. The figure of the old man was back, and it was just staring at her children. Jackie lets out this huge, terrorizing scream, and whatever that thing was completely vanishes, and she grabs her children and runs out of the house to her neighbors. Throughout the following weeks, I guess you could say that Jackie was right. The spirits had been disturbed, and they were upset at the fact that the paranormal investigators had come into the home. And the way they made this known to her was that the activity increased tremendously. Things started being thrown around the house quite violently. Jackie had also been attacked as well. She had been pinned down by what she described as being very large skeletal hands. And if that wasn't enough, she had also been pushed around, shoved, and even scratched multiple times. Not knowing what else to do, she then turns to Dr. Barry Taffy, gives him a call, basically begging for him to come back and to help her. Initially, her call went to voicemail, and it didn't take long for them to get her message, and they knew just by the way she sounded and the terror in her voice that something was definitely wrong and that they needed to help her. So they actually decided to return to the house the same night that she called them. When Dr. Taffy's team arrived to Jackie's house, they found her outside on the doorstep, kind of just like visibly shaken up. She was very uncomfortable going inside, but they somehow managed to get her to go back in with them. At this point, the house was said to have been oddly quiet. There wasn't anything going on. Without wasting much time, the investigators decide to head straight for the attic. So they climb onto the washer machine and remove the trapdoor from the attic, and Jeff and Gary head up this time while Jackie and Barry were waiting in the laundry room, waiting for the other two to finish. Initially, there was nothing out of the ordinary in the attic. It was actually pretty quiet. But Jackie, again, her intuition told her that something was going to happen. She just felt like there was something completely wrong. Slowly, Jeff and Gary then said they started seeing small orbs of light starting to manifest in the attic, followed by what sounded like the snapping of fingers. As the two men were starting to head back down from the attic, Jeff was literally violently pulled back up by something unseen. Immediately, everyone starts to panic. Everyone is kind of screaming, not knowing what's going on here. Gary immediately heads back up using his camera to go see what happened to Jeff. And because there was no lights in the attic, he used his camera and starts clicking a million times just to use the flash for light. And he also wanted to see if he can get a photo of what had just happened. And to their horror, this is what they see. In this photo, you can see that Jeff is hanging by his neck and he's attached to the rafters in the attic. Whatever had attacked them had managed to use a clothing line tied into a kind of noose form situation and wrap it around his neck, pull it so tightly, and then wrap it around the rafter in order to hurt Jeff. Gary, thankfully, was able to approach Jeff and he was able to untie him and get him down safely. And when they went back down to the laundry room, they looked a little bit closer at Jeff and they could see that he did have red marks all around his neck to prove that whatever did attack him had used quite a lot of force. Needless to say, everyone got out of there as fast as they could. At this point, Jackie was completely out of options. There was clearly something evil in her house and she had no idea what else to do. So basically, she was forced to move out and she actually ended up moving in with her ex-husband, Al. By this point, he had been able to secure another living situation and he was actually living in a trailer home in Weldon, California in September. So Jackie decides to move in with him and their children. This was a huge relief for Jackie because she, the entire time, figured that the problem was with the house. And she figured that if she were able to move, that all of this would go away. That's what common sense would tell us, right? However, that wasn't the case for Jackie. Shortly after she moved back in with Al, they started arguing, they were bickering, and it just basically reminded them of why they had gotten divorced to begin with. But she figured it was better to deal with her husband than to deal with something that she couldn't see. And initially, even though they were arguing, there was no activity in the house, nothing was going on. And she had finally started to feel like the spirits had left her alone till something actually happened. One evening, a new neighbor of Jackie's was actually helping her move a few things into a shed, and one of those things was an old TV that they weren't using anymore. So as they're moving this TV, Jackie turns to look at the screen, and to her horror, she sees the face of the old man that she had seen in her home in the attic staring right at her. Mortified, they just decide to toss the TV into the shed, lock it up, and get out of there as quickly as they can. That same evening, Jackie swears that she could hear something pounding on the shed door all night, like something was trapped in there and trying really, really hard to get out. So again, not really having anyone to turn to, Jackie decides to call Barry one more time, hoping that they would be brave enough to come to her new home. And surprisingly, they agreed. Almost immediately upon their arrival, things started going very wrong. Equipment was malfunctioning. Some of it wouldn't turn on. The battery would drain almost instantly. And for reference, this is quite normal on paranormal investigations. especially when there's quite a lot of activity going on. What's actually happening is that the spirits use the energy from these electrical equipments in order to communicate or make themselves known somehow. So obviously the team is not having much luck, so one of them actually decides to suggest they use a Ouija board to communicate. And again, don't do this if you know anything about the spirit realm. Do not use a Ouija board unless you absolutely know what you're doing. And even then, I would still say don't use it because you have absolutely no idea what you could invite into your living area. And so everyone agrees and they decide to pull out a Ouija board. During the seance, Jackie was keeping track of the answers the spirit was giving them. And what they found out was completely unexpected. And I'm going to read you some of the questions and answers here. So the team asks, how many ghosts are in here? Phantoms fill the skies around you. How long have you been trapped in the spirit world? 60 years. Did you die in the San Pedro house? No. Where did you die? San Pedro Bay. Did you drown? No, I was held underwater. Did you live in the San Pedro house? My murderer lived there. And there were some more questions that were documented, and we'll go into that a little bit more here. So as the seance continued, Jackie and Barry's team discovered that the ghost was actually a man named Herman Hendrickson, who was born in 1912 and had tragically passed away in 1930. He had been a fisherman, and unfortunately, his body was found floating in the San Pedro Bay on March 25th, 1930. And in the seance, it was also revealed that the reason he had attacked Jeff that evening in the attic was supposedly because he resembled the man that had murdered him. After the seance had completed, the activity finally began to slow down. As for the spirit of the old man Jackie kept seeing, she seems to think that it was the spirit of a man named John Damon. And the reason for this is because when Jackie was visiting San Pedro in 1990, she was taking a walk near her old neighborhood. And that's when she supposedly saw a glowing light, kind of like an orb, fly out of her old house and head towards a nearby cemetery. It then stopped and hovered over a particular gravestone before finally disappearing. And Jackie was apparently watching all this happen, so she decides to follow where the light had gone. And when she gets to that particular grave, she reads the name of a man named John Damon, but sadly, that's all we know about him. After this, Jackie would then go on to move a few more times. She moved out of her husband's trailer home. She moved a few more times on her own, and then she finally ended up settling in Los Angeles. So I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, well, why? Why would all of this stuff happen to Jackie? Well, Dr. Barry Taffy has a theory, and he suspects that Jackie was the perfect victim for all this to happen because she was extremely vulnerable at the time. She was going through a lot of stress. There was a lot of drama in her personal life. Her optimism was dwindling. She was losing a lot of faith, and all of this creates a lot of negative energy. Now, because of the amount of claims in this story and how horrifying a lot of these experiences were, people tend to believe that some of this is not entirely true, which makes us wonder whether this was true or if it was a hoax. From what I see online, people are torn 50-50. Some people who believe in the paranormal seem to think that this is definitely possible, and the circumstances surrounding Jackie's life at the time would have indeed made the perfect environment for a poltergeist to manifest. And if you guys, again, are into the paranormal, or if you know anything about spirits, you know that negative energy can quite easily manifest a negative spirit in the house, also known as a poltergeist. Others believe that this entire thing was a complete hoax and made for attention in order to create, the 15 minutes of fame. What I will tell you, though, is that during the time I spent researching this case, I came across many variations of the story. I did watch several videos of Jackie recounting what happened to her, but like I said earlier in the video, there are different media outlets reporting additional events or slightly different versions of the events that Jackie didn't fully go into in the documentary. Some speculate that the investigators were actually responsible for exaggerating the events that occurred. And this comes from an interview that Jackie gave in 2012, where she claims that the investigators always seemed much more interested in documenting the experiences and making a movie out of what was happening instead of actually helping her. But that's where the story ends, and that's all the information I was able to find online. I know from a personal experience that if this ever happened to me, I would be completely mortified. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you guys think that this was a hoax? Do you think this actually happened? Or do you think that the truth lies somewhere in the middle? All right. Thanks so much for joining me, guys. That's it for today's story. And if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe. And if you guys are into true crime and the paranormal, head over to my TikTok, same username at Heebee Jeebeez TV for some more content. I post a lot of short stories on there, stuff that I do not get to do on my YouTube channel. All right, thanks so much, guys, for joining me on this video. And if you guys have any other case suggestions, leave them in the comments below. It could be anything paranormal, true crime, anything interesting that you guys want me to talk about, let me know, and I'll definitely take a look. Thanks so much, guys, and I will see you in the next video.